This is Awards Buzz, and we are here discussing the Oscar-shortlisted short film Bad Hostage. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well. How are you?
So great. Thanks for having us.
Of course, there's a lot covered in this film and a lot of different hostage situations, and I'm curious for both of you, what was your entry point into this? And was there a particular situation that was like the beginning of it all that led to everything we see?
Yeah, so this definitely began with the story of my grandmother. So, the primary kind of entry point into the whole film is this conversation that I have with my grandmother about the time that she was held hostage in her own home for one night in 1973. And this was actually a story I had grown up hearing my whole life. It was very much kind of part of the family lore. I had heard it really mostly actually not from my grandmother, but from my mom. So my mom had always told me this incredible story about this night that they were held hostage. And then about this kind of shocking backlash against my grandmother. My mom really vividly remembered this experience of my grandmother being told, it's ignorant sluts like you that make our job so hard, a police officer telling her that. And so it was just a story I was totally fascinated by growing up. It had a punchline, it had humor, it had drama, I was so compelled by it. And as I, then became an adult and became a filmmaker, I did start to wonder if it was entirely true. It's, how things happen in family mythology, things get embellished. And so I started looking into it a little bit and was amazed to find out that not only was it true, but it was kind of even more dramatic than I could have realized. And so that kind of set us on this journey of first exploring my grandmother's story, but then kind of widening the lens to see that, the kind of surprising dynamics that she encountered in this story of this sort of twist where she actually felt more threatened by the police than she did by the men holding her hostage, that this had also played out into other actually, more well-known hostage situations that had taken place or kidnapping situations that had taken place within a year of my grandmother being held hostage. And so that's how the film kind of came to be.
And just to add on at the end of that, like those two other hostage situations, the hostage situation in Stockholm and this bank heist that coined the term Stockholm syndrome, and then the Patricia Hearst kidnapping, which kind of proliferated it in the States. In both of those cases, very different details that happened and very different experiences, but like at the end, the kind of like aha moment for us of like let's weave these three stories together was the women at the center of those both said exactly the same thing as Mimi's grandmother said of we were more scared by our captor or by the police than we were of our hostage takers. That was
Or
kind of
yeah,
the
at least
end.
in Stockholm. Yes.
At
Hmm.
least in Stockholm, yes.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there were questions that you couldn't or shouldn't ask, maybe that you wanted to be sensitive about? And did you have any trepidation about interviewing your family and whether you might be too close to this story?
Definitely. I think, the funny thing is when the first interview I did, of course, was with my grandma, very early on, and she was totally confused about why I wanted to do this. She was game, she was generous with me with her time, but and her stories, but she felt like, why would anyone care about this thing that happened to me? Why do you want to talk about this? But she was up for it. Um, and so I'm really grateful for that. And I think for me going into the interviews, I thought that we were making a film about trauma and memory and I was asking them kind of questions about that. But my family kind of were all I had to listen to what they were actually telling me, which is that this wasn't necessarily a really formative trauma in their life. Like this wasn't something that really haunted them necessarily. It was a big thing that happened to them, of course, but it wasn't kind of playing the role in their own lives in the way that I went in expecting it would. Of course, it's a great story, but it wasn't kind of what I thought. And so that's one thing I love about the process of making a documentary is that you go in with an idea, but then you have to listen to what you're actually hearing and what people are actually telling you and what the stories actually are. So that was a very cool experience to then realize we had to pivot and follow where the story was actually taking us, which was different than where I thought it was going when we first started.
in showing this film now, have you encountered any reactions, let's say, from law enforcement or negotiators or anything that might have been in either in line with what was true back then or completely in opposition and a much better perspective now on how things should be treated?
It's a good question. I think definitely in the sphere of hostage negotiation, things have changed a lot. I think, the 70s are kind of known for a lot of these sorts of situations, and I think that certainly hostage negotiation tactics are really different today than they were in 73. But that said, I think unfortunately a lot of the dynamics in these stories are things that I do see still play out all the time. I think there's a line in the film from my mom that I really love where she says, the police weren't trying to they weren't trying to find a solution. They were trying to win, that they were kind of trying to win this battle. They were trying to take revenge on these criminals, and um, I think that that is a really dangerous thing that I do still see play out a lot, especially, from people in power, from authorities, and these kinds of shows of force, this kind of desire to crush the enemy, as opposed to actually trying to keep people safe, trying to save lives. And I really think that, my grandmother's behavior inside the house of remaining calm, of not rushing to any assumptions, of really viewing people really compassionately, and about really just staying focused on keeping people safe and alive and finding some way to find a dialogue, even when her life and her children's lives were in danger. It was just is incredibly admirable. And I'd like to see more of that in the world, really.
Max, anything to share?
Yeah, it's just remarkable. Every time I've watched the film, every time I have spoken to Michaela, Mimi's grandmother, I'm just awed at the pose and composure she brought to a situation where these two guys showed up at her house in the middle of the night. Her six kids were there, and she just five kids, sorry. Um, and she just kept everyone safe, and she was able to do so without coming, like Mimi was saying, with how can I like overtake these guys? Like, how can I like get the upper hand in the situation? It was very much grounded in the kind of person she is, of just like a deeply compassionate, empathetic person who saw the humanity in these two guys and chose not to see them as adversaries, but as we're in this situation together now. How can we survive?
Well, it is distinctly different and doesn't involve a woman, but Dead Man's Wire is a film that I've been thinking about a lot as I'm, seeing. I think these two would pair very well together. I'm sure that in your research for this film, you encountered that story, but have you seen the film and how do you feel that these are, are there any other through lines between them besides hostage situations in the 70s that were sort of laced a little bit interestingly with humor?
I haven't seen the film. Have you, Max?
I haven't seen it either, but I know it's with Bill Skarsgård, right? And he was in, was he the Skarsgård who was in the Stockholm Netflix show that was out a couple years ago?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So haven't seen it, but we'll definitely be checking it out.
Do you feel like there's more to this story? Is there a narrative feature version of this, or is this does it work so well because it is documentary?
I think there's definitely more story here. I think, this is a short, and so I think particularly with the stories of Patricia Hearst and Christina and Mark, there's of course so much more to those stories and so many details that we couldn't include in this film. And so I hope that, if people watch this film, they go out and learn more about those stories and learn more about those stories in a critical way, looking carefully about who's talking about them, what they're saying about it. And then certainly I do think that there's the potential for a narrative feature in my grandmother's story as well. I think it's such an amazing story that obviously worked at least very well for me as a kid growing up. And I think it's just an incredible story.
And yeah, Michaela is just such a strong, incredible, charismatic, funny, warm person, and she it just comes across in the film. And yeah, when thinking about like a narrative feature, like it's an incredible nuanced she's an incredible nuanced person, and just anchors our film in such an incredible way, and anchored Mimi family in such an incredible way in this situation.
You don't have to share it, but you have an idea of who you'd want to play that character in a narrative feature? I don't want to ruin any dream casting if you're like, well, we're actually going to think about this.
I think we definitely have a few ideas, but I'll keep it to ourselves for now.
Well, before I let you both go, is there a film, whether it's a short or a feature that you've seen recently that's really sticking with you this award season?
Oh, I love that question. I saw Predators recently, David Ossett's film, and I was really blown away by it. I thought it was incredibly difficult to watch and has definitely stuck with me, but I thought it was really, really just intelligently crafted and was asking some really difficult questions that I think are really worth grappling with. So I was really impressed by that film. I thought it was really unique and original and really courageous. So that I've certainly been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about The Perfect Neighbor, which is a shortlisted feature category. It's just like this is Bad Hostage is such an archival film, and I'm coming from like a very like archival filmmaking background, and I think that film is just brilliant in how it kind of like redefines like what an archival film can do, and just like placing you in this perspective that when you're watching it at the start, you're like, how am I going to like identifying this kind of like almost first person body cam footage that they do for the entire time. And it just, you fall into it. And the editing in that film is unbelievable. And the way it just kind of like makes its point and the kind of impact it's trying to have by not just like laying it all out for you, but by putting you just so immersively in the experience of this unbelievably traumatic situation. It's a film that I think is just like kind of like redefined how I'm thinking about documentary filmmaking in a lot of ways.
Definitely great choices on perspective. Thank you both. I wish you plenty of luck with this film, and I will look out several years from now for that casting announcement and be like, I suspect I'll write down my choices right now so that
We
I
can
know.
compare.
Perfect. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you
Thank you,
so much.
Abe.